Hello everybody, Katarina here. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I have for you another card for the summer. I'm going to be painting an ice lolly. This is very simple to paint. It's definitely for beginners and also for those who are looking for cards that are more budget friendly. So let's get started. The supplies are very minimal. I will have them listed over on my blog, but you don't need the exact brands I'm using. Whatever you already have or is in your budget will do. So you need watercolors. You will also need watercolor cardstock. I'm using a cheap one from Amazon. I also have different brushes. I usually need to try different ones and see which one feels the best. I also have a washi tape to hold my paper and a few banners with a sentiment, but this is optional. And of course, I have 2 jars with water and a paper on the side. As I said, it's very easy to paint. If you know how to paint a rectangle with a slightly rounded top, you are good to go. I'm doing here a 2-colored ice lolly, but there are other variations you can create, or you could just use 1 color. I'm going to do the wet on wet technique, and because I'm not sketching anything, I first use the water to create the shape of the ice lolly, and then I filled it with the water. You can use a clean water to create the shape, but I diluted the lightest color, the mint color, with the clean water, mainly so you can see what I'm doing, but I also kind of like this. It's just easier to see where you apply the water. Also, if it would be easier for you, you can first draw the shape using a pencil and then apply the water. You don't need too much water, just a light wash. If you see the water is pooling, use a paper towel to soak it up. I sped up the video a bit so it's not too boring for you, but if you think it's too fast, let me know in the comments. Next, I applied the darker paint. Is it turquoise? I think it's turquoise. And I applied it at the top and the bottom of the ice lolly. I also used my brush to help it spread around the paper. And then I applied the mint color in the middle. I used my brush and I tried to blend it in with the darker paint as well. I really wanted to create a multicolored ice lolly, but as I said, you can use only 1 color or darker at the top and lighter at the bottom. Actually, at the end of the video, I will show you a few more examples that I made because it is so addictive. So, after I applied the main coat of the color, while the paint was still wet, I went in and added a few drops here and there of more saturated color. I wanted it to have more organic look, although I'm not sure I'm using the correct term. You know what I mean, this watercolor uneven look. I let the piece dry and then I painted 2 lines. They're supposed to represent those indentations that you get often on these ice lollies. I started first with the mint. When you paint these, you want to create dark edges, sort of an illusion of depth. There are 2 ways of doing this. Here I started with the darker, more concentrated paint, and I first created an outline, and then with a lighter color or clean water, I went in and spread the color around. But you can also add the lighter shade of the color first, and then go with the tip of your brush along the edges using the more concentrated color. I prefer the first way, as for me it's easier, but sometimes I mix them, especially if I feel there is not enough color around the edges. Also, you want to be careful with the water. There are spots where I did use too much water. It didn't bother me too much, but you can always use a paper towel to soak it up. Next, I painted the wooden stick. I used a dark brown, but you can also use a yellow brown. And I painted the little wooden stick at the bottom. Nothing special, nothing complicated. I started light and then I added a few dots of darker color here and there. And I also added a darker paint along the edges. I let the piece dry and then I added some splatter. As you can see, the splatter went everywhere, all over my craft mat. You don't have to do this if you prefer more cleaner look, but I love splatter. I would even say that I overdo it sometimes. The thing is, I use the splatter as an embellishment. You could of course use enamel dots, nuvo drops or sequins. That would look nice as well. The next thing I like to do, which is also optional, is to add some kind of a frame. There are a few things you can do, but when I use watercolors, I like to add either gold or black around the edges of the cardstock. And that's what I did here. But you can also use a black fine liner to create a frame, solid line or dash line. You can use a colored cardstock that is slightly bigger than the watercolor panel and adhere the watercolor panel on top of it. Or you can use a die and die cut the watercolor panel. The simplest would be a stitched rectangular die or scalloped die. So I let everything dry, and while it was drying, I thought I will make another card. I watched few tutorials how to paint an ice lolly, and one of them was from Emma Fave. The link to the video you will find in the description below. She created a background with multiple ice lollies, and I thought it was a great idea, so I gave it a try. I taped a watercolor panel onto my craft mat using a washi tape, just in case the paper would warp, and also to create a frame. And then I started painting. I used this Winsor & Newton watercolor palette. I could have used the other paints that I used for the first painting, but I haven't used this palette for a while. I really like to start with a light wash of color, so I did this here as well, and then I added the darker paint. You can also sketch this first to see where you want the ice lollies to be, which might be a little bit easier. When you are painting them, you need to keep in mind that you need to leave a little bit of space at the bottom for the wooden stick. So I painted few of them first, then I painted the wooden sticks, and then I continued with additional ice lollies. Also, I painted few of them along the edges. Last year I painted a background with watermelons, and after I took off the washi, there was too much of white space and it looked a little bit weird. So ever since, when I paint a background, I make sure I add additional images along the edges, as you would have if you used a pattern paper. Once I was done with all the lollies, I painted the vertical stripes, the indentations, just like I did on the big ice lolly. And I also added some splatter at the end. Once everything was dry, I adhered the panels on top of a card base that I made out of a craft cardstock. If you don't make your own card bases, you can also buy them pre-made. And lastly, I attached a black banner with a white embossed sentiment that says "Let's Celebrate," and I adhered it on top of the panel using double-sided foam squares. But as I always say with these complete DIY cards, the sentiment is optional. If you don't have stamps, you can write your own sentiment or just completely leave it out. So the cards are finished. I also adhered the same sentiment on top of the other card. I hope you will try to paint this yourself. It is very easy to paint and also very addictive, at least for me. As I said at the beginning, I painted few of them, and here they are. Here is one more background. Then I also painted pink version of the turquoise mint ice lolly. But you can also just paint one color. Here I used blue. And if the shape is a little bit wonky, it doesn't really matter. At least it doesn't to me. I really like these little imperfections. Here I also used one color. This is supposed to be a Coca-Cola ice lolly. And as you see, I did not adhere here a sentiment. Actually, I forgot to adhere it. But as you see, it still looks very good without it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you liked it, I would really appreciate if you give this video a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't done so already. If you would like to see more cards like these, especially if you are looking for beginner DIY cards on a budget, I created a new playlist which is on the top right of your screen. And if you haven't checked out my videos for YouTube Shorts, make sure you do, especially if you don't watch those. Apparently they don't show on your regular feed. That is all for this video. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you soon.